Ma'am, stop recording and hand me your ID. This is a federal checkpoint.
I'm recording because it's my constitutional right. And no, there is no law requiring my ID without reasonable suspicion.
You people always think you know the law.
I don't think I know it. I teach it. Now cite the statute, or step back.
The camera was already rolling when the officer's face appeared at the driver's window. And within the next 8 minutes, everything he thought he knew about power, authority, and intimidation would crumble right there under that metal checkpoint roof. What he didn't know was that the woman behind the wheel had spent 15 years teaching constitutional law at one of the top universities in the country, had argued cases that made other lawyers sweat, and had absolutely zero tolerance for people who used badges to hide their prejudice. This wasn't going to be another routine stop where someone nervously handed over their documents and drove away with shaking hands. This was going to be the worst day of his career, and every single second was being recorded. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you appreciate stories where people stand up for their rights, please hit that subscribe button right now. It really helps us bring you more content like this. Thank you sincerely. The checkpoint sat about 75 miles north of the Mexican border, a permanent structure that had been there for years. Cars passed through it every single day. Some got waved through in seconds, others got stopped for longer. Anyone paying attention to the patterns would notice something interesting about which cars got the quick wave and which ones got the full treatment. But most people just wanted to get through and continue their day. Elizabeth Berry had been driving back from a legal conference in Arizona. She was wearing a simple blouse and had her conference badge still hanging from her bag in the passenger seat. Her car was clean, her registration was current, and she had absolutely nothing to hide. She also had something that most people rolling through that checkpoint didn't have: complete knowledge of exactly what the law said about these stops. When the officer stepped up to her window, she noticed everything. The way he looked at her, the slight change in his expression, the way his whole body language shifted from the bored routine of someone who had done this 1,000 times to something more focused, more suspicious. She had seen that look before. Every black person in America had seen that look before. He leaned down slightly, and that's when she saw what he was holding. A small laminated card, the kind they give to travelers to make everything seem official and legal. He held it close to her window like it was supposed to mean something important. She didn't reach for her ID. She didn't turn off her phone, which was mounted on her dashboard camera, pointing right at him. She just waited. His first words were direct. He told her to stop filming and hand over her identification, calling it a routine checkpoint. His voice had that practiced authority that came from years of people doing exactly what he said the moment he said it. But Elizabeth wasn't most people. She told him, her voice calm and clear, that she understood exactly where she was sitting and that filming him was her constitutional right. She said it simply: the way you'd tell someone the sky is blue. A fact, not an argument. The camera was staying on. You could see something flicker across his face. A tiny moment of surprise, maybe annoyance. He recovered quickly, though, saying what officers like him always said to people who knew their rights. He made a comment about people who think they know the law because of something you saw online. His tone had that dismissive edge to it, like he was talking to a child who had just discovered Wikipedia. Quick question for you watching. Have you ever had to stand up for your rights during a traffic stop or checkpoint? Type yes or no in the comments. That's when Elizabeth said the words that should have immediately changed his entire approach. She told him she didn't watch the law. She taught it. Then she asked him a simple, direct question. What statute required her to give ID without reasonable suspicion? It was a basic question, the kind any federal agent working a checkpoint should be able to answer instantly. These stops had been challenged in court multiple times. There were specific rules about what agents could and couldn't do. Anyone working that checkpoint should know these rules like they knew their own name. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he leaned closer. His voice took on that tone that was meant to remind her who had the badge and who didn't. He told her this was a federal inspection zone, that he asked the questions, she followed instructions, and that was the order of things. It was a power play, plain and simple. Answer my question with your authority, not with the actual law. Elizabeth didn't blink. She told him if that was true, then he should easily be able to cite the law backing his demand. Then she said she'd wait. The pause was beautiful. You could see him trying to decide how to handle this. Most people would have given up by now, handed over their ID, apologized for causing trouble. The system relied on that fear, that desire to just make the uncomfortable situation end. He tried a different approach. He told her she was making this harder than it needed to be, that most people cooperated. Her response was perfect. She said most people didn't know their rights, but she did. Then she asked again for the legal basis. This was when things took a turn that would end up costing him everything. His voice shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. Anyone watching the video could hear it. He said she was awfully confident, then paused before adding that folks from her background were usually more respectful. There it was. The mask had slipped. Elizabeth caught it immediately and called him out. She asked him directly what he meant by her background. What exactly was he referring to? He dug the hole deeper. He said some communities tended to be difficult. All on camera. Every word, every implication, every bit of the prejudice he had probably been carrying his whole career. Usually hidden just well enough to avoid consequences, now out in the open and being recorded in high definition. Elizabeth didn't get angry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed out exactly what he was doing. She told him he was trying to bait her so he could justify detaining her, and that it wasn't going to work. She brought the conversation right back to the law. He threatened escalation. It was the last card he had to play. The implicit threat of force, of making her day much worse, of using all the power his position gave him. But threats only work on people who don't know they're empty. Elizabeth calmly explained that he couldn't escalate something he couldn't legally justify. She pointed out that he had approached her without cause, that he was holding a pamphlet meant to intimidate rather than inform, and that he still couldn't name a single statute that gave him the authority to demand what he was demanding. He fell back to asking for simple cooperation. The word simple doing a lot of work there, trying to make her seem unreasonable for asking basic questions about her rights. She told him to simply state the law giving him authority. She reminded him he was a federal agent. This should be easy. The long pause that followed said everything. He had nothing. No statute, no regulation, no legal authority for what he was trying to do. Just the badge and the assumption that the badge was enough. When he finally spoke, he said he didn't have to explain every detail to her. Wrong answer. Elizabeth corrected him. She said, "Actually, he did. The badge didn't remove the Constitution." And just like that, it was over. He stepped back and told her she was free to go this time, like he was doing her a favor, like he had the authority to make that choice in the first place. Elizabeth thanked him for confirming on video that he had no legal reason to stop her. Every word she said was a nail in the coffin of whatever complaint was about to be filed. He muttered something as she prepared to leave. Something about always the difficult ones. Her final words to him were perfect. She said, "Always the prepared ones," and bid him goodbye. The video was 9 minutes and 43 seconds long. She uploaded it that evening to multiple platforms. By the next morning, it had been viewed over 200,000 times. By the end of the week, it had gone viral with millions of views. The comment sections were filled with people sharing their own stories. People who had been stopped at that same checkpoint and felt something was wrong but didn't have the knowledge to push back. People who had handed over their documents with that sick feeling in their stomach, knowing they were being treated differently but not understanding why. People who wish they had known what Elizabeth knew. But the video didn't just live in comment sections and social media shares. It landed on the desk of people who had the power to do something about it. The American Civil Liberties Union contacted Elizabeth within 48 hours. They had been monitoring checkpoint abuses for years and had specifically been looking at this location after receiving multiple complaints. Her video was the clearest evidence they had seen of an officer overstepping authority and, more importantly, showing racial bias during a stop. The Border Patrol's Internal Affairs Office had no choice but to open an investigation. The video was everywhere. News outlets were running the story. The officer's face was clear in the footage. His badge number was visible. Every word he said was recorded with perfect audio. There was no ambiguity. No, he said, she said. No way to claim the encounter had been misunderstood. The officer's name was Dan French. He had been with the Border Patrol for 12 years. This wasn't his first complaint the investigation would later reveal. It was just the first one with video this clear, and a person who knew exactly how to make a record that couldn't be disputed. Do you think body cameras should be mandatory for all checkpoint officers? Just let us know what you think. The investigation took 6 weeks. They reviewed the video frame by frame. They pulled records of French's other stops looking for patterns. They found them. Over the course of his career, French had stopped vehicles with drivers of color at a rate significantly higher than the baseline traffic. His stop times for these vehicles were longer. His rate of requesting searches was higher. The pattern was undeniable once someone actually looked at the data. They interviewed him. He claimed he was just doing his job, that the stop was routine, that he had authority to ask for identification at a checkpoint. When investigators pointed out that he never actually cited the specific authority when asked, and that his comments about the driver's background clearly indicated bias, he became defensive. He said the job was stressful, that people didn't understand what it was like dealing with hundreds of cars a day, that everyone was too sensitive now. None of it mattered. The Border Patrol had clear policies against racial profiling. They had training modules every officer had to complete. They had specific guidelines about checkpoint stops, including what questions were permitted and what level of suspicion was required for certain actions. French had violated multiple policies in a single 9-minute interaction. The legal analysis was even worse for him. Elizabeth had been absolutely correct in everything she said at interior checkpoints like the one where she was stopped. Border Patrol agents can ask about citizenship and immigration status, but demanding identification without reasonable suspicion goes beyond that authority. Multiple court cases had established this. The Supreme Court had ruled on it. French either didn't know the law he was supposed to enforce, or he didn't care. And then there were his comments. Folks from your background, some communities tend to be difficult. There was no way to interpret those statements that didn't involve racial bias. His lawyers would later try to argue he meant people who know their rights or individuals with legal training, but nobody was buying it. The context was too clear. The termination letter was delivered on a Friday afternoon, 14 weeks after the video was posted. Dan French was fired for cause violation of anti-discrimination policies, failure to follow checkpoint protocols, conduct unbecoming a federal officer. The letter was 3 pages long and cited the video 11 times. But losing his job wasn't the end of it. Elizabeth filed a formal civil rights complaint with the Department of Homeland Security. The ACLU backed it with a legal team that specialized in these cases. They weren't asking for millions or trying to get rich. They wanted acknowledgement that her rights had been violated, and they wanted to make sure it was expensive enough that the agency would take preventing future violations seriously. The case never went to trial. The government's lawyers watched the video and read the investigation report and knew exactly how it would look to a jury, a law professor calm and respectful, asking reasonable questions. An officer who couldn't cite basic legal authority and made racially coded comments, all on crystal clear our video. They settled. The terms included a monetary payment to Elizabeth of $75,000. More importantly, it included mandatory retraining for all officers at that checkpoint and 3 others in the region, new supervision protocols, regular audits of stop data to identify racial disparities, and a requirement that all checkpoint stations post clear signs informing travelers of their rights. Dan French also faced personal financial consequences. As part of a separate administrative proceeding, he was fined $18,000 for violating federal employment conduct regulations. It was one of the largest individual fines issued to a Border Patrol agent for this type of violation. He appealed everything: the termination, the fine, the characterization of his conduct. Every appeal was denied. The video made it impossible to argue he had done nothing wrong. His own words condemned him more effectively than any investigation report could. Elizabeth gave exactly 2 interviews about the incident. Both times, she kept the focus on the bigger picture. She talked about how many people go through checkpoints every day without knowing their rights. She talked about how power without accountability leads to abuse. She talked about the importance of knowing the law, staying calm, and documenting everything. She didn't talk about French much at all. He wasn't the point. He was just one example of a system that needed fixing. The video became required viewing in several law school classes on constitutional rights. It was used in training sessions for new lawyers. Civil rights organizations used it in Know Your Rights workshops. It became a teaching tool, which made sense because that's exactly what it was. A master class in how to assert your rights calmly, clearly, and effectively. The checkpoint where it happened changed, too. Officers there knew they were being watched more closely now. Stop times became more uniform across different demographics. Complaint rates dropped. Data audits showed the racial disparities narrowing, though not disappearing entirely. Progress, even if incomplete. French never worked in law enforcement again. His termination for cause made it nearly impossible to get hired by another agency. He tried security work for a while, then left the field entirely. Some people who followed the story felt this was too harsh. Others felt it wasn't harsh enough. Elizabeth, in one of her 2 interviews, said she didn't spend time thinking about his career. She cared about whether the system had learned anything. The fine he paid went into a federal fund for civil rights training. So in a strange way, his money ended up being used to teach other officers not to make the same mistakes he made. 3 years after the video went viral, the checkpoint had a new sign at the entrance. Large, professionally printed, impossible to miss. It informed travelers that they had the right to remain silent beyond answering questions about citizenship, that they had the right to refuse searches without probable cause, that they had the right to record their interaction with officers, and it listed a phone number for filing complaints. The sign existed because Elizabeth Berry knew her rights and didn't back down when someone with a badge tried to intimidate her into forgetting them. That's the real lesson in all of this. Not that one officer got fired, though that mattered. Not that one law professor won a settlement, though that was justice. The real lesson is that rights only work if people know they have them and are willing to stand up for them even when it's uncomfortable. Even when someone with authority is leaning into your car window and using their power to make you feel small. Elizabeth taught constitutional law before that day at the checkpoint. She taught it during those 9 minutes and 43 seconds, and she's still teaching it now. Every time someone watches that video and learns that you can say no, you can ask questions. You can demand that officers follow the same law they claim to enforce. The camera stayed on. The rights were protected. The officer learned that a badge isn't a free pass to treat people however you want. And millions of people learned that knowing your rights isn't being difficult, it's being prepared. If this story inspired you or taught you something valuable, please share it with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about people standing up for what's right. Your support means everything. Drop a comment and let us know what you took away from this. Thank you for watching until the end.